Once when I was in college, I had a bicycling accident and broke my arm. Ended up spending the entire summer with a cast from my elbow up to my wrist that left me unable to do pretty much anything with one hand. As anyone who's ever had an injury or disability can tell you, it takes some effort, it takes some time to retrain the body so that the other parts of the body can compensate and can take over for that one part that's not working quite the way it should. So I can appreciate St. Paul's image in this reading today as he explains to the Corinthians and through them to us his image of how a church community should operate. He says, just as our own body is made up of many parts, so the church, which we understand as the body of Christ, is made up of many parts. Just as in a healthy body, all the parts work together for the good of the whole, so too in a church community, the body of Christ, all of the members of the body work together to serve the common good. There are three, I think, important lessons that Paul gives us in this reading today that I'd like to focus on. The first of those is this, that we are all important members of the body of Christ. So don't be that foot that says, because I'm not a hand, I don't belong to the body. Or don't be that ear that says, oh, if only I were an eye. No, be a foot, be an ear, be the best darn spleen you can be if that's where God has put you. And don't ever think that your contribution to this body is not valuable. Something I maybe shouldn't say, but it is true, that not every young man in this parish should necessarily be encouraged to go to the priesthood. We do need priests, don't get me wrong. And anyone who feels that they might be called to that particular vocation should be given as much encouragement as we can. The church needs good priests, good young men who can dedicate themselves to a holy, a beautiful, a very rewarding, but also very challenging and often thankless vocation. And if you don't feel called to that particular way of life, then that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It just means that God has something else in mind for you. The church does need priests, but the church also needs deacons. It needs singers and altar servers. It needs teachers and lay ministers. It needs administrators and bookkeepers and custodians. It needs someone to cook meals for the soup kitchen or for the funeral luncheons. The body of Christ has many parts, and every part serves an important function. Second lesson that Paul gives us today is that we do not decide who is or who isn't a member of the body of Christ. A healthy body is one in which all of the parts work together for the good of the whole. The healthy church community should be open and welcoming to everyone. Paul expands on this a little bit when he says, the parts of the body that seem to be weaker are all the more necessary. And those parts of the body that we consider less honorable, we surround with greater honor. And our less presentable parts are treated with greater propriety, whereas our more presentable parts do not need this. I'll leave it to the imagination exactly which less honorable or less presentable parts of the body Paul is talking about here. But if we're talking within the body of Christ, within the church, I think his point is a little more straightforward. And Jesus makes it all the more clear in our gospel reading today. He says that he has come to bring glad tidings to the poor, to proclaim liberty to captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free. Those people whom society would see as less honorable, less presentable, less desirable, these are the people that Christ puts first in his own mission and ministry. Christ inverts the social values of the world so that the first will be last and the last will be first. And as members of Christ's body, we are all called to do likewise. Think back to that image of the broken arm and how all the other parts of the body have to adjust and step in and do a little bit extra work to compensate for the one that's not working. If we always consider the needs of the poor, the oppressed, the downtrodden above everything else, we more easily see the differences between Christ's values and the values of the secular world. Our world idolizes wealth and power and prestige, and that ideology can too easily infect our institutions. Even the church is not always immune to that influence. But when we make a point to honor those whom the world would scorn, those whom the world would ignore or push to the sidelines, that is how we set ourselves apart and show ourselves as belonging to Christ. So don't be that head that says to the feet, we don't need you in our body. A church that's all head and no feet might have some great ideas, but literally no way to take the steps to implement them. The third and final lesson I want to look at is one of unity in diversity. Whatever our differences in talents, our background, our stations in life, we have all been baptized into the body of Christ, and we all share the one bread that is that same body of Christ. That is, after all, why we are all gathered here today. We come to celebrate the Eucharist, to receive the bread and the wine that are the body, the blood, the soul, and the divinity of Christ. As St. Augustine said, we come to behold what we are and to become what we receive. We behold on the altar the body of Christ, that same body of which we are ourselves members. And we come to receive that body in the Eucharist, to once again become that which we receive. So this sacrament we're about to participate in reminds us of and also reinforces that unity that we all have as members of the body of Christ. Earlier in this same letter to the Corinthians, St. Paul warns them that anyone who eats and drinks without discerning the body eats and drinks judgment upon themselves. So as we partake today of that Holy Eucharist and receive the body and blood, soul and divinity of Christ himself, look around at your fellow parishioners, fellow members of our community, and recognize that we are all, they are all, you are all members of that same body.